Ukrainian soldiers repelled the most Russian assaults in the Pokrovsk direction. In this sector of the front, the enemy unsuccessfully tried to attack the defense forces' positions 29 times. The situation also remains tense in the Lyman direction, where Ukrainian defenders repelled 13 assaults by the Russian occupation army.
The occupiers tried to break through the positions of the Ukrainian defense forces in the direction of Siversk. More than 30 units of heavy armored vehicles were involved. These included tanks as well as, APCs and IFVs. Moreover, all the equipment was destroyed by the Ukrainian defense forces. And this indicates that the Russian occupiers are running out of time. In other words, they used armored vehicles, which they are already critically short of.
And near Kostantinivka in the Donetsk region, Ukrainian border guards destroyed a Russian drone control center. The defenders note that a powerful strike was delivered on the target. Enemy infantry was also eliminated and their equipment destroyed.
We were working on the grads.
We target the grads, we target counter-battery positions, enemy artillery, we strike enemy personnel during rotations, and also the vehicles involved in those rotations. They bring in personnel, these are the so-called Laki and Vakti, meaning passenger cars and trucks.
In the North Slobozhansky and Kursk directions, Ukrainian soldiers have repelled 7 Russian attacks since the beginning of the day. As military experts note, in the Sumy region, the armed forces of Ukraine have not only stopped the enemy's advance but are also pushing them back. At the same time, the invaders are suffering huge losses.
It has indeed been verified, and the Russians themselves have confirmed that the Russian Federation had to withdraw from at least 2 villages in the Sumy region that had previously been captured. We understand that there is practically nothing left of them there. The Ukrainian army continues to press Russian forces precisely in this direction.
Ukrainian soldiers repelled 4 assaults each in the Pokrovsk, Siversk, and Torets directions. And near Torsky, the defenders even captured several Russian occupiers who were hiding in a dugout.
At first, the occupiers resisted, but after a few gifts, they quickly realized that captivity was better than death. Brilliant work by the True Steel Lions. From a report by the 63rd Separate Mechanized Brigade of the Ukrainian Armed Forces on Telegram.
In the southern Slobozhansky direction, border guard aerial reconnaissance helped FPD drone operators detect and destroy Russian occupiers' positions, as well as their communications antenna.
Recently, we
had a situation. Our reconnaissance spotted an antenna for Russian UAVs, and our FPV crew immediately destroyed that antenna so they couldn't operate there.
In addition, Ukrainian soldiers also demonstrated that no matter how many tanks the Russian Federation sends to the battlefield, all of them will be destroyed by Ukraine's defense forces. And military experts note that the Ukrainian armed forces have already burned through almost all the equipment reserves in Russian warehouses.
The Russian Federation is now facing a dilemma. There are practically no reserves of Soviet armored vehicles left. About 60% of the Soviet armored vehicles that were stored in long-term storage facilities in the Russian Federation have actually been destroyed by Ukraine's defense forces. And that's why there's this change in the tactics and strategy of using armored vehicles. It's not even a matter of the Ukrainian Defense Forces' total superiority in FPV drones, but rather the very fact that there is a lack of heavy armored vehicles.
According to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, in just one day, Ukraine's defense forces destroyed 4 tanks, nearly 40 artillery systems, a multiple rocket launcher system, an air defense system, burned almost 100 Russian vehicles, and shot down 200 drones. In addition, more than 1,000 Russian occupiers were eliminated the day before. Thus, since the beginning of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the Russian army has already lost more than 1,051,000 soldiers.
We're going to talk about what's happening right now on the front lines with our guest. Joining us live is Pavlo Kachuk, Head of Military Security Programs at the Center for Global Studies, Strategy 21. Pavlo, welcome to Freedom.
Glory to Ukraine.
Good morning. Glory to Ukraine.
Glory to the heroes. Pavlo, let's probably start with what the General Staff is noting. It's clear from the information provided in the reports that there's some kind of increased activity, right? Well, obviously, the Pokrovsk direction has been tense for a long time, but nevertheless, there is an intensification of combat operations. We can see that the occupiers are starting to use more heavy equipment, and there are even some mechanized assaults. Can we say now that this so-called summer offensive has entered a new phase?
Well, obviously, the enemy's operation in the east of our country, I mean the broader Pokrovsk direction in the widest sense of the word, from Chasiv Yar in the north to the Napovlivka direction in the south, is entering a decisive stage. Then, and the key to these events is the defense of Pokrovsk. It's no coincidence that not so long ago, the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, General Zaluzny, had to inform us about Russian sabotage and reconnaissance groups in Pokrovsk, which were infiltrating Pokrovsk. The key point here isn't that the enemy managed to send their saboteurs into the city, but that this is a kind of reconnaissance indicator, preparing for a probing attack before a decisive assault on Pokrovsk. Right now, the city, or more precisely, the Pokrovsk-Myrnogorod agglomeration, is surrounded by the enemy on three sides. A frontal offensive is ongoing from the Soldar direction, from the south. Attempts to bypass the city from the Dnipropetrovsk side, from the south and southwest, are ongoing. The enemy has cut off the Pokrovsk-Moshiva highway and is trying to reach Pokrovsk-Pavlorad, thus attempting to cut off our defenders in Pokrovsk and their supply lines. And the most dangerous thing here is that, after reaching the Pokrovsk-Koshchentinivka highway, the Russians regrouped and are trying to organize an offensive from the north and northeast. So, Pokrovsk is in a kind of bowl. The Russians are advancing from three sides and believe this is the moment for a decisive assault on the city. How successful they will be is hard to say. It all depends not only on their desire, but also on the capabilities and readiness of our forces to defend this key junction. If we hold Pokrovsk, then the enemy will still face problems with attempting an offensive on, obviously, their main objective in this spring-summer campaign. For now, it's probably too early to talk about a fall offensive. That's the agglomeration of Kostiantynivka, Droshkivka, and Kramatorsk.
Pavel, and next I'd like you to comment on what's currently happening in the Zaporizhzhia region. The Commander-in-Chief of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, Oleksandr Syrsky, inspected one of the hot spots on the front in the Zaporizhzhia region. He noted that compared to other directions, there are fewer combat clashes here. However, in the area of Kamyansk, Russian occupiers are actively using guided aerial bombs, artillery, and attack drones, and they also continue to unsuccessfully assault the positions of the defense forces with small groups.
Syrsky emphasized the situation in this direction is controlled by the armed forces.
We are aware of the plans of the Russian occupiers. On our side, measures are being taken to improve coordination between military units and to reinforce our divisions in order to ensure the resilience of our defense and prevent the enemy from getting closer to Zaporizhzhia. I am sincerely grateful to the defenders, both men and women, who bravely withstand the attacks and destroy the Russian aggressor. Ukrainian Zaporizhzhia stands on your shoulders, as does all of Ukraine. Oleksandr Syrsky, Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, Facebook. Pavlo, in your opinion, what are we witnessing right now? What is the situation? And I would also like you to comment, in general, on the significance of the Commander-in-Chief's visit specifically to this area.
Well, compared to the areas that are the hottest according to the General Staff, that is, the east, on the southern front there is a relative lull. Well, relative. This shows that the enemy has not been able, and is not able, to form two groups of forces capable of conducting a strategic offensive simultaneously. The main reserves have been thrown to the east. But nevertheless, in the south, it's not only Kamenskoye, not only near the Dnipro, but at all the key sections of the southern front, That's Kamenskoye. That's the Orakiv direction. That's the Huliapol direction. The enemy is trying, to attack, trying, and obviously, the goal of these, enemy actions is to take up more advantageous starting positions. So, logically, it's clear that if the Russians succeed in the east, achieve their objectives, or, on the contrary, if our defense forces give them a hard time and stop this offensive, which is ongoing in the Pokrovsk, Chasiv Yar, and Lyman directions, as well as in the southeast and the Novopavlivka direction, then, as a second or backup stage, the Russians are considering the southern direction, just like in 2024, last year, when they were building up a force grouping there, obviously foreign. Offensive. But as a result of active actions by our defense forces both in the east and the Pokrovsk direction at that time, and in the north with Ukraine's counterattacks in the Kursk region, the Russians were then forced to redeploy the main forces that had been preparing for an offensive in the south to the east and to the north. But now the Russians are preparing and carrying out preliminary measures for a possible offensive in the south. Well, naturally, our command hasn't forgotten that the front line isn't just in Sumy region, not just in Kupiansk, not just in Lyman and Chasiv Yar, but also in the south. We're not forgetting about the south either. Since the commander-in-chief is inspecting this section of the front, it means it remains in the focus of our command, our general staff, as an important area of military operations.
Pavel, but at the same time, we are responding, and the use of heavy equipment. At some point, the occupiers started using it quite actively. And, at the same time, there are statements from the main intelligence directorate and from foreign publications that possibly by, closer to September, or even by the end of summer, Russian troops could be reinforced by North Korean soldiers, mercenaries. I'm not sure what the right term is. Please correct me if I'm wrong. Overall, well, it doesn't look like the Kremlin is ready to suspend hostilities right now. It doesn't seem like they're planning to change the logic of all this in any way. So how would you describe the possible scenarios for how the situation might develop?
The Kremlin isn't planning to stop the fighting at all. This is evident not only from the situation at the front, which, by and large, is now in the midst of a peak period of the Russian offensive, which Putin's generals have no intention of stopping. It would be nonsense to stop at the climax of their military operations. No, they are continuing the operation. Their senior leaders, the political leadership, are watching to see what comes of it. And even more so, there's no talk at all about suspending hostilities. Both Putin and his Minister of Aggression, Belousov, and the rest of that bunch are saying as much. Peskov and Medvedev, if you can even call him a political figure, and Foreign Minister Lavrov are all saying in unison that Russia has no intention of abandoning the goals it set for its army, and that they will continue trying to achieve them by military means. So, well, I don't know what will happen in September. This will be determined, again, not only by the plans and intentions of the Russians, but also by the capabilities and actions of Ukraine's defense forces. If we are able to hold our positions, the enemy will at the very least be forced to regroup its forces and look for reserves and resources to restore its capabilities. So, that's why we're talking here about the possible involvement of North Koreans in combat operations and the possible use of Belarusians. And, as another option, about yet another so-called partial mobilization wave of Russian suitcase carriers, drunks, all the Leningraders and Petersburgers lumped together.
Let's just finish talking specifically about what's happening on the front line right now. Pavel, thank you very much for joining us. You're always welcome here on Freedom.
Subscribe to UATV English and stay updated on the most important events, top news from Ukraine and all over the world, in-depth analysis, exclusive reports and interviews, all on hand in our channel. Join our community of viewers and stay tuned.